Hello and welcome back. Mr. Hein here to show you another topic in math today. Before we start, take a deep breath to just clear our brains, get focused in for the next hour or two. We'll be working on this to try to make sense of it, because if there's distractions, it's hard for us to always think about what we're doing. And math requires a lot of focus on our end. So be aware of your thoughts, whatever's on your brain right now. And then just take those thoughts, take your focus onto your breath, just listening and focusing there. Breathe in and out. More times like that. In and out. And through the nose only, in and out. Hopefully that helps you dial in and focus in a little bit better. So this video is on domain and range. Okay. Now, what is domain and range? Domain is all your inputs, and range are all your outputs. And that's the simple way of saying it. But this video, because of your work, is going to focus more so on graphs, how to find what domain and range is. And really in math, that's what we care more about. All right, so say I make a graph here, and I'm going to do something like this. It goes up, over, and back up. Okay. Now, your domain, remember your inputs are the x, and x is left and right, the x-axis. So your domain is kind of thinking about like how far left and right the graph goes. That right there is your domain. So on a graph, it might be how far left and right. Your outputs, on the other hand, is like the y value, and y is going up and down. So in a different color, your range in this graph, there's the highest point, there's the lowest point. So that, if I turn my paper sideways, is your range. Right? So that's how far up and down. So in this example here, what would be my domain? And I'll just put a D for domain and R for range. So here's 0. The farthest left point is right here. Well, that's at -1, -2. So that's at -2. So I have inputs from -2. So I have inputs from -2 to, and notice there's a point there, there's a point there, a point there, a point there. And that point is the farthest over, and that's all the way at +2. So I have inputs from -2 to +2. And there's your domain. Your range is I have outputs from, and we always write small to big. A lot of people in the past always go high first, but usually in math, it's not conventional. So the lowest it goes, but that's the lowest point, and that's at -1. So from 0 down 1. So from -1 all the way up to 2, +2. And there's your range. From -2 to +2 are your inputs. That's how far left and right. And your range is from -1 to 2 on the y. Okay. Now, let's do another example, and I'm going to show you a common mistake people make. So let's say I look at a graph, and we'll go from 0, and the graph will go up like so. And that's the point 2, 4. Okay. And I asked you, what's the domain and what's the range? So again, remember, domain is left and right. So it's going to be here to here. That's your domain. And your range is the y value. So your range is from the highest point to its lowest point. Where its lowest point is down here. That's your range. So your domain here, the smallest is at 0. So it's from 0 to 2. And your range is also from 0 to 4. And there you go. Now let me ask you this. Is this correct? If someone were to write this, is they say, okay, that's a 0.00 and that's a 0.24. So they might say, well, your domain is 0, 2, where they're saying it's the 0 and the 2. And they'll say your range is 0 and 4. 0 and 4. Are these saying the same thing, right? Your domain that I study over here is from 0 to 2. This one's just saying 0, 2, like 0 and 2. Well, what you have to understand is a line is actually many, many points are on this line. And there's so many points on this line that they get so close together that there's infinitely many points. So all of these are points too that have x values like inputs and outputs. All of these have values. So when you just say 0, 2, really what you're saying is this graph here, where if I was to make this, it would be 0 and this. That's what this is saying. But notice, is this the same as this? No. Right? This only has 2 points on it. It only has 0, 0, and 2, 4. Well, this one, when you say 0 to 2, it's all values in between. So that word 2 means all values in between. And that's something you want to be aware of. So if you just say 0 to 2, that's not correct because there's more values, or if you get more specific, inputs and outputs between those points. Right? So be careful with your terminology. Right? You want to use that word 2 to talk about all those values, points in between, because there's infinitely many. Let's look at another example. So let's say I did a graph, and it looks something like this. Where this is at -3, this is at 2, this up here is at 3, and this down here is at -1. What's your domain and range? So your domain is left to right. That's your domain. So it's going from -3 to 2. That's where the graph lives. Think about like a fence, maybe. That might help you too. And your range, in case that's in your view, is the lowest point, -1 up to 3. There's your domain and range. Okay. Yeah, you might want to think about it as like a fence. Like your domain and range should box this graph in. So at -3, notice that there's nothing over to the left of -3, and at 2, the graph doesn't go past this. And at the top, that's the highest and that's the bottom. So it's like this box you're making around it. Okay. Now here's a new situation that might come up. What if you just had a straight line with arrows on it that looked like this? I picked my paper there. Okay. What's your domain and range? Okay. Well, how far left is this graph going to go, right? If I tried to say it stopped right there and said, oh, there, well, that's not correct, though, because of the arrow, it's going to keep going, in which case I'd have to go out farther. But that's not true because it's going to keep going, right? Because of the arrow, it's going to keep going left forever. So your domain is -infinity. It goes left forever, right? That's what -infinity kind of means. And then to the right, that graph, that arrow is going to keep going to the right, so it's going to go to +infinity, right forever. That's what it means. And then infinity is like a sideways 8, if you've never drawn that before. As for your range, how far down does it go? Well, it's going down forever. So -8 because it's going down forever. 2, how high up does it go? Well, it's also going, it's going to keep rising, so it's going to go to +infinity. In other words, up forever. So there's your answer there from -infinity to +infinity for the domain and negative infinity to positive infinity for the range. Okay. So that one's kind of a tricky one that you might see. And let's see here. Oh, and then a little side note for one of the problems. If you have an equation, say like y equals x plus 2, and it asks for the domain and range, right? That in that case is going to be all numbers, negative infinity to infinity, negative infinity to infinity, because you can plug in any number and technically you can get out any number there. This just makes a straight line if you were to graph it. And a straight line, like we just talked about, has that domain and range. However, if, say you looked at something like 1 over x plus 1, this domain, and this is a tricky one, is actually all x, but x cannot equal negative 1. Why can't x equal negative 1 here? Because if I plugged in negative 1, what's negative 1 plus 1? Well, that's 0, and 1 divided by 0 is undefined. That's not possible. So that's why your domain, you can plug in any number, but you cannot plug in negative 1. And your range is going to be negative infinity. We're just going to stick with that for now. You'll learn more about this one later, but that one is a question that you might need some guidance on. So again, you can't divide by 0. Keep that in mind. Okay. So I hope that helps. That's domain and range for you. Give it your best. Go come to Office Hours if you need to, and good luck.